Hello and welcome to another edition of Another Book Review. This week I'll be reviewing Freddie deBoer's book, The Cult of Smart from 2020. I'll talk very briefly about the author, go into an overview about what the book is, talk about what I liked about it, what I didn't like about it, who I'd recommend the book to, and finish off with what I'll be reading for next time. Freddie deBoer is a teacher and both at the high school level and the college level. He is a self-described Marxist, and he looks at the education system through his own experience as a teacher, but also through a broader lens of the meritocratic system and how he feels that it's failing students and society writ large by making intelligence kind of the de facto indicator of whether or not someone's going to be successful in society. And the book is, I think, very honest and very clear-eyed from Freddie's perspective. I think he's writing this from a place of wanting to do better. I feel that the book takes a lot of pretty big swings as far as his recommendations, which when talking about the education system, I appreciated. But the fact that he wrote this, I think is probably going to take or has taken some flack from it. He was on a podcast I listened to a few years ago. I'll leave it in the link below if I can find that again. Where he talks about a lot of the same ideas. And so I would, if you don't read this book, if you can't track it down, I would also recommend that podcast that he's on. I think Learning Machine is the name of the show. And he's on, I think, the first episode of that. That's still is pretty, I believe it's still on Spotify, and I'll leave it below. But that's the book. So the book is him looking at the system and how it fails students and how it's deeply unfair. He looks at things like academic standards in high school for high schoolers and why mathematics, things like calculus and algebra are maybe too high of standards to ask. They seem to be the thing that fail a lot of people. And the question is it necessary for someone to know calculus and algebra in order to go on to live healthy, productive lives? And part of it is, he kind of touches on, doesn't really spend a ton of time, is if high school is really designed to prepare you for college, what is it doing for people who are not going to college? And that's the bigger part of the book. So, like I said before, he takes some pretty big swings, policy recommendations wise. They come at the end of the book. So things like 12-year-olds should be allowed to drop out of school because at that point they know whether or not they're academically gifted enough to go to college or not. He also says that school quality itself is kind of an illusion because schools are able to select the students more or less the way that they want to. And that's much more important than the actual quality of the teachers. Another opinion I think he has that's probably going to anger a lot of people, and probably maybe even more than the 12-year-olds being able to drop out of school, is teacher quality and how much that actually matters to a student's academic achievements, which is kind of one of the underpinnings of the way that we look at schools, the idea that there's good teachers and bad teachers, and good teachers are able to take unmolded students and turn them into great students. And there's no limit to what students can learn as long as they have the right teacher and the motivation. And he believes that that's just patently untrue. The other thing that's controversial, there's a lot of controversy in this book, is the degree to which intelligence is inherited and how much that actually ultimately matters. And those arguments, I think, are the ones where he's going to get the most flack. Some of it is because I think just the nature of anytime you talk about intelligence across groups and within groups, and across genders, and across racial lines, and across class lines, people get upset about that. And sometimes his arguments make sense. There are other times where I looked at it a little bit askew. He kind of talks about the way that we look at female IQ now versus back when the original intelligence tests were given. He doesn't really give me enough, in my opinion, background to the differences between the way it was then and the way it was now to fully make his point. He does look at a lot of different other works in order to make his arguments. Richard Reeves' Dream Hoarders is quoted in the book. There's other famous kind of books in this vein that are quoted in the book. Let me see if there's anything else that I think. Yeah, I think those were all mostly the things that I liked about the book. I thought that those points, at least from a sense of like getting a conversation started and forcing people to look at things that they don't necessarily want to look at and questioning what this is doing to people, I thought was really well done. And overall, his point is, even if you believe, I guess just to finish the pros before going to the cons, even if you believe that the biggest barriers to people's success is other factors such as discrimination and unequal funding of education, even if you did away with all those things and those were gone and people were just competing on their academic ability, there are some people, in his opinion, that are going to be left behind. And even in that system, that's a cruel system because you've set up a system where people's ability or inability to succeed or fail doesn't really lie on their efforts. It really relies on inherent traits that they have because intelligence, if intelligence is what he says it is, meaning it's a factor that's going to make them succeed or fail based on the current society. He would say in this society, it's really the factor, and so it does matter. It's unequally distributed. The counter argument to that is how much does raw intelligence really matter in anybody's ultimately success or failure? And that kind of leads me to the cons. I think he has a very PMC, professional managerial class first look at the world and basically says, all the rewards are going to these people and there are no rewards going to everybody else. And I think it's a pendulum that shifts back and forth, swings back and forth. In some years, the PMC is ascendant and they're able to get work and find jobs and get paid well. In other years, it's very difficult to find work. We're in one of those periods now. And the jobs, companies cut back and they don't hire as many people, white-collar workers. And so it kind of swings back and forth. And he acknowledges that other things swing back and forth. He kind of talks about how STEM and CS degrees, to tell everybody go into STEM and CS really doesn't make sense even from a practical standpoint because you're just going to flood the market. And that's basically what he said has happened is that college has basically served to flood the market with a bunch of people who've spent all this time and all this money to just kind of get pulled in with a huge group of people that it really hasn't done the signaling it needs to do for employers. And he kind of worries about a world where we go even a step further where it's this constant stream of credentialization in order to tell employers that you're worthy of employment. So that is also something that I kind of see in my own life and think that may be, in fact, what's going on. And the issue that he doesn't ultimately come to is really a replacement for that. He does talk in the end. The last 15% of the book are really his recommendations from a Marxist standpoint. He kind of says that we live in an age of abundance, and he kind of sidesteps the egalitarian nature of all this stuff by saying, I'm not saying that everybody's going to be able to have a Ferrari. The benefit of the capitalistic system now is everybody can have basically their own goals and they can reach them or they cannot reach them, but not everybody has the same goals. And so getting everybody on a consensus of what qualifies as the good life or the just world is also part of the problem. But ignoring that for now, back to kind of the other things in the book that I could have done without. He has a little bit of his personal story I didn't really need. I thought that padded the book a little bit. He has a long section about, or kind of a section that's kind of about Bill Gates and Common Core that felt a little tacked on, I'll be honest. And then the charter school system. He takes umbrage with charter schools, and the main issue that he has is that charter schools are not on a fair playing field. And he points to things that charter schools have done that where they've basically been able to exclude students with special needs and other things to behavioral problems in order to make their numbers look better. He doesn't seem to have an issue with the documented cases of public schools promoting students without being grade level ready. He doesn't seem to see that as a problem and detrimental to the students and detrimental to society, because I think he sees the whole grade system being an illusion. But that in and of itself does damage to people. But doesn't really compare the two, in my opinion, to an apples to apples level of what I would say is fair and just. There's also, should always be noted when we're talking about charter schools, at least now, and maybe it's changing, but when I last looked into this, charter schools make up like 10% of students. So it's not just this massive wave where it's coming to take, all the jobs and all the money from other people. It's just not that large. And so maybe that's changing. I don't know in the last, year or so since I've looked into this, but it's just not the boogeyman I think he makes it out to be. He also doesn't seem to see the contradiction that I think a lot of people would have if you told them, well, teachers, they don't actually, in the ultimate scheme of things, their abilities don't actually matter to individual students as much as environmental factors and raw intelligence. And there's actually not a whole lot they can do to help improve children's academic standards compared to these other factors. Well, if you say that and then also have unions protections and all these other things, then I think someone's natural ability is to go, well, if that is true, why are you asking us to pay them more money if their efforts are ultimately, according to you, going to not be particularly effective by about the time they're like 12? So he doesn't seem to see the contradiction in that. To me, that's a pretty clear contradiction. He talks about Waiting for Superman, where there's a famous, in that documentary, there's a famous animated scene where you have a teacher pouring in knowledge into a child, and I think that's the way that most people think of teachers. If you're saying that that's actually not that important, and that's actually not how teaching works, it really is just a matter of putting the right material in front of the student at the right time, but not actually, teaching. That to not see why that would be an issue for a lot of people, and I think that's kind of one of his blind spots in this book. So ultimately, if you've read Addicted to Reform or The Tyranny of Merit or Dream Hoarders, and I've reviewed all three of those books, and I'll leave those links below, if you like those books, you'll probably like this one. I think, like I said, because it is pretty controversial, it says a lot of things that I think are going to make people mad. And I'll let you read the intelligence section on yourself and come to your own conclusions on that. I thought parts of it made sense to me, and there are parts of it that I thought were maybe left to be desired. He spends a lot of time on the book on that, and maybe he could have said, there's a lot of research on intelligence. We don't really have clear-cut answers as to why there are intelligence differences between groups. It could be this reason. It could be this other reason. He talks about environmental factors like lead paint. One would ask the question, if it was environmental factors like lead paint and you have certain groups of people throughout the United States, that you would expect the people in areas where there's lead paint to be affected by it, and people without the country to not be affected by it. And you would also have to have a lot of cases of lead paint in order for that to be the case. And that also is a situation where it's a relatively few number of people. But it would have to be the environmental factors do a lot of heavy lifting, I guess is what I'm saying when I talk about this. And not to say that can't be a factor, but it's in this book, it's doing a lot of heavy lifting for how big of a factor that could be. And I think the onus was on him to show, statistically speaking, why that would be a factor. You would have to show me that these pockets of places are actually impacted by it, but these other places, the people in these other places held constant for income and gender and all these other things, are not impacted by it. And I don't think he does that work. So I thought it was a very thought-provoking book. If you're someone who likes to think about the education system, if you're a teacher, you may enjoy this. I know that there's a lot of people who have read his stuff. In the podcast, I think there are people who kind of bounced or fought some of his ideas and didn't really gel with them. But I highly recommend the book, just if you're someone who's at all interested in the education space. If you like hearing big ideas and kind of things that may seem extreme, like I said, he definitely has those. The idea that school quality is not a big deal, it ultimately doesn't matter, I think is a pretty controversial opinion for a lot of people. I think also the idea that you should be allowed to at 12 to drop out of school is a pretty controversial opinion. He has a section where he talks about the universal basic income versus the guaranteed jobs program that felt a little out of place, and some of the stuff about the Marxist beliefs that are the last 15% of the book felt a little out of place and didn't necessarily feel necessary for me. There are other people who may have enjoyed that, but I thought he could without it. Cults of Smart, Freddie deBoer. Next time I'm going to be reading Murder. Until next time, as always, please like the video if you've enjoyed this. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Until next time, bye.